it was in 1933 when Hitler burned down.
So don't ask me, ask her.
1933, all right. You're coordinating, right? When Hitler burned down the Congress in Germany,
Yeah.
he was specific on who he was targeting to eliminate, right?
Yeah.
He targeted the Jewish people and others.
Yeah, you can say that.
So now that they're targeting, they're trying to set up the same situation that Hitler used and in his regime and the Third Reich. When they do it, if they do it here, which I hope they're not, and if it takes us to stop it, who are they targeting? They targeting everybody? Is nobody? Is all inclusive? Is no ethnic?
Yeah.
Here, it's just everybody in general.
Yeah, because if you think the world should only have 1 billion people on it, there's not one ethnic group that's 5.7 billion. You're gonna have to get rid of a lot of everybody. And see, they can do it now through environmentalism. They don't have to say it's the Jews, right? They can just say human beings are a cancer on the planet. So it's human life itself that's bad. And it's very insidious. There are all kinds of ways this comes in, like the whole question of health care. Because they have all these little brainwashing things where they say, don't you think it would be really undignified to live with a feeding tube? Well, I don't know that that's undignified. I mean, if my mind was sharp, I'd want to be there. In fact, personally, these people are so rotten. I think everybody here should agree that we're going to live as long as possible and make them give us every kind of whatever just to stick it to them. They're trying to kill us off. But I mean, so they say like things like quality of life. And I don't say this because there are certain decisions that families make and so on, but there's very rarely now a decision that is not meddled with by the insurance companies that say you can't be in this facility unless you agree, no feeding tube, no, resuscitation, whatever. You have to have all these rules where you're not going to cost any money if you're going to stay there. And then you have arguments which happily most people still consider extreme, but they might not be considered extreme with that guy, what's his name? I forget his name. One of Obama's advisors, Singer, I think, who says that you should be able to kill an infant up to the age of 2 if it's born with congenital birth defects. Right? So you have, because they're saying you are just your physical body. That's what, as opposed to what we saw, which is that human beings are unique because of our creativity, because of the non-physical, what we contribute. And the way that people contribute also is not known. It could be that a child with Down syndrome, maybe that child doesn't, discover fusion energy, but their life makes everyone around them a better and more compassionate person. So who are you to measure what the value of a person is? But so it's every kind of way. It's the environmentalist movement, it's the healthcare system, it's an assault on humanity.
Well, Richard,
okay.
I just wanted to make a comment about this S&P downgrade. The standard and whore raping agency. Because when this came across the newswire last night, I was actually nauseated by it. I mean, to me, it looks like things are going to accelerate in the downward spiral that this type of action is going to bring on. And it doesn't even make sense logically. But for example, I pulled off the statement of the S&P on this, and you read through this, your anger should build, because what do you base a rating on the ability to repay a debt on? Your revenue, your profitability, your balance sheet. Okay, when has the United States ever made a late payment? You know that if you, the credit card companies when you send your check in late and they receive it late, it's a mark against your credit, right? Has the United States ever been late on a debt payment? Have they ever not made a debt payment? Did the S&P evaluate the balance sheet of the United States and give its analysis in this document that they provided? No, they didn't. What does it talk about? We want these politicians to cut entitlements. We want them to cut Social Security. We want them to cut Medicare. And we want them to show us that they're going to be able to cut as much as possible. That's the only thing you can get out of this document. That's the entire basis for their downgrade. It's total, complete, fabricated bullshit. I mean, I just got so angry about it that, okay. Also, I go to the Wall Street Journal on the way through the bus station coming over here, and there are severe implications of this downgrade. If this thing could turn into what is sometimes called a death spiral, meaning that they're worried about the ability to repay. They have not provided any kind of justification that the United States cannot repay their debt. On the other hand, the effect of downgrading should be to increase interest rates. Well, if they're increasing interest rates, what's the point of cutting this 1.5 trillion? Because they're going to have to pay out 1.5 trillion eventually in higher interest rates anyway. So what is the point? My point is that the S&P had no right in doing this downgrade. They do not justify it except to make it into a political wedge, a political hammer that they want to use in cahoots. Quite clearly, there's an agenda and there's a cahoots. This is a cabal, a conspiracy. I mean, Scott was talking about it earlier. But I want to quote from this morning's Wall Street Journal that this downgrade could lead to the prompt debt downgrades of numerous companies and states, driving up their costs of borrowing. Policymakers are also anxious about any hidden icebergs the move could suddenly reveal. And such a jump in rates, like they're talking about now a 0.5 percentage point increase, which could be the beginning of higher increase, more increases. Such a gain in rates could increase the cost of a wide array of debt, from home mortgages to trillions of dollars of debt carried by the U.S. government itself. Now we're going to municipalities, and some municipalities are having trouble making a connect between what's going on at the federal level with these arguments and how does it affect them. Oh, they should be worried only about important issues like filling potholes in the streets in their towns. Well, guess what? Why should the municipal debt of Garfield, New Jersey have the same interest rate if all of a sudden the U.S. government has to pay a higher rate of interest? An investor, since the investors are gods, they're going to look at that and say, hey, look, the U.S. government's paying higher, you better pony up. You're not going to get your 7% anymore. So it's going to filter through. This thing can filter through the entire system. So any discussion that they have had about raising the debt limit being offset by cuts is complete gibberish, nonsense.
No, I appreciate that because it just makes the point of what I said earlier, that this is a war. That the intent is the destruction of the United States. That we were not making a deal to crush people, cut $4 trillion, and then they were supposed to protect our credit rating. It was exactly the same thing. We do the cuts and they downgrade us so that we are now committed to the destruction of the United States. And it's not going to get better. And the politicians are not trying to help you, and they're not trying to solve it, unless they're saying that they're working with us. We have, 32 co-sponsors on Glass-Steagall. We need that to be 100. We need the Senate to stop being such pragmatists. People know, McCain had said publicly at a town hall meeting that he was going to introduce a companion bill in the Senate. Maria Cantwell was involved before. And people's view was, well, we have so much of a kerfuffle around this debt ceiling, we don't want introducing Glass-Steagall to be a diversion or get it. In other words, they're not thinking straight. So you're saying that the interest that is determined to destroy the United States, that they're going to define the rules of the game, and then we're going to do things according to their rules. And that's, you know, what we have to be very firm about when we get out of here. Congress is home. They're out of session right now through Labor Day. And every one of these congressmen should be on Glass-Steagall, or they should be, you know, run out of town. They have to get on this. And as I had said before, and we'll discuss this later, it really is very, very good to nail them publicly, because if you can force them to publicly commit to doing it, then you can hold them to it, especially if you have them on video like we did with Charlie Rangel, which worked very nicely. But that's how we got him on. Anyway, other questions?
Well, all the way in the back.
Alvin?
Alvin.
You had a question?
Well, that's what Bruce was saying, that in question to Hitler and the fascists, that after their failure, fascism took a new term, and it's called liberalism. So the approach in killing is going to be a very liberal approach, but they're starting immediately, it's already ongoing. The two targets are the old and the young. And we're just going to see an accelerated rate of that. LPAC put on its site that some out of Cook County, government report issued that some 66% of children were already now currently being denied aid, medical assistance on Medicaid, from broken bones, cuts, and illnesses. So, you know, that the collapse is here, and the death march is on now, and it's called liberalism. That's the name of it. And you start with the old, go into the young, and the rest of us will get squeezed and wiped out. Lynn's been very clear. We're talking about millions, if not tens of millions of people dying if we don't get this thing going. I'm glad to see that for at least this week, we've filled up the room. Why? Well, maybe we're getting it now. Maybe some of us aren't getting it. Maybe we're not. When I talk with Dennis, he says you have to keep talking to people, but you're also looking for a quality of person. And those that aren't responding, you don't stop talking to them, but you don't spend 3 hours talking to them. And that's oftentimes what I've been guilty of. And so hopefully we can move from here and start talking with those folks that are willing to act and join us. I don't really think there's a shortage of them now, because we're feeling it, we see it's there, and let's double the size of this meeting next week.
Just on what he referenced, for people who didn't hear about it, this was a horrifying study. What happened was a group of doctors led by an emergency room physician decided to pose as parents of sick children from the age of 9 months to 10 years or something like that. And what they did was they would call specialists or call doctors' offices. It wasn't emergency rooms, but they would call the doctor's office and say, my child is a 1-year-old, a severe rash has broken out all over her body, her temperature is 102, I'm on Medicaid. And they would say, no, we will not see your child, because Medicaid pays the doctor's office $100 and the regular insurance pays $160. And what they found was in 66% of the cases, the children were turned down. And these were cases where they would say, I think my 2-year-old broke his arm. They'd say, sorry. So, you know, when Bruce was asking, who are they targeting? This is the brainwashing. Yeah, sorry, but.
Go ahead.
A lot of people, they're talking about how they don't want to treat their child, but what they're actually doing is through these vaccinations that they're giving to children, especially the ones that go into the nasal spray, the very young children. They have all kinds of disease in them. And you won't see it right now. You may not see it for 5 years. But they're neurologically destroying young children.
It's not true.
Yes, it is. I have documentation on it. I'm sorry, from doctors all over the country. I have documentation on it. Maybe not every single vaccine, but a lot of the vaccines, especially in poor neighborhoods, are going into children and they are killing the children down the line. I have the documentation, I'll get it to you. All right, they are. And elderly people who take vaccinations, after 3 or 4 years, are more likely to get the flus because your immune system is shot. And the vaccine that they give you, there's no guarantee you won't get the flu because they don't know if they're giving you the right strain.
Well, there are two aspects to that, because as people know, they absolutely, you had the syphilis experiments in Tuskegee, there absolutely are experiments in drug pushing, especially on poor children, like what they did with attention deficit disorder, where they were having non-nurses dispensing drugs in the schools and things like that. There also is, and this is the tricky thing, because there is a legitimate purpose for vaccinations, which work, which, you know.
HS1. I'm talking about the HS1.
Okay, yeah, but I'm saying, but see, part of what's done is for our whole culture, because our whole culture has become so anti-scientific that you don't know where to turn, what's true, what's, you know, and everything is based now on superstition instead of the science, because we've lost our scientific outlook. Because if you're going to go with the assumption of the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy, which is what is taught everywhere, and I was listening to a presentation by one of our young people on the science team, and he said he was listening to a class on cosmology, you know, the science of the universe. And what does the professor say? The universe is a giant box of gases, and they're all dissipating and winding down. And this is a professor of science. And of course, what do you see if you look at the development of the planet? Well, first, there was no life. And then there were single-cell things. And then there were fish. And then there were things that developed on land. And you look at where we are now. I mean, how complex is the biosphere? And it's totally interconnected. Like, one of the fascinating things is you think plants are separate from animals. Well, how many plants depend on having an animal eat the seeds and carry the seeds somewhere else and poop them out? And that's how the plants develop. I mean, everything. The plants that grow depend on fungus living on their roots. I mean, our biosphere has gotten so incredibly complex that the natural thing for human beings is to take a delight in discovering it and figuring out and wondering how it works. And that's all being crushed by these idiots who say, no, it's winding down. And they probably use the example of, look at New York City. With no maintenance, everything falls apart. That's the law of the universe. No, it's not. But you have this deep anti-scientific pessimism. I often feel like we're going back to the days, you know, Ben Franklin, I don't know if people know this, Ben Franklin was actually blamed for causing earthquakes because he developed the lightning rod. And prior to the lightning rod, you know, lightning particularly would hit church steeples because they were very tall, and they would say, well, why did it hit that church? Well, that's because they were involved in witchcraft. So there was a big whole superstitious cult around lightning over who it struck and what it struck that had demonstrated that there was witchcraft. And so Ben Franklin figured out this nifty little way of, you know, having the lightning and grounding it, and so it didn't do any damage. So then what happened was they had lightning rods all over Boston, and there was this earthquake, and a whole bunch of the churches came out and said it was Ben Franklin tampering with God's will and designing the lightning rod, and that's what caused the earthquakes. And I often feel like we're somehow back in that kind of world. It's so, you know, anti-science. Okay.
Next thing you know, we'll be bringing witches to giving the evil eye.
Diane, I just want to reiterate what this lady has said about the vaccines of children. I've been reading prolifically about the compulsory vaccines that are being ingested into these young children, And we're finding out more and more each and every day that some of these vaccines are completely devastating and injurious to these children. Okay, so these are some of the things that are emanating throughout the United States.
Yes,
What I want to say, also in regard to the vaccinations, it's been proven by different, scientific research that vaccinations, first of all, a lot of people that take vaccinations, particularly the flu vaccination, I myself was one of them until I stopped a couple of years ago when I did my own research and I discovered what was in those vaccinations. There's Thermacell in it, it's a compound Thermacell. There's formaldehyde, which is a known carcinogen. There's aluminum, which is connected to Alzheimer's. And a lot of other different things in there that are very, very dangerous. Now, I know that when I myself was taking the vaccinations for many years, because I also, not that I was tended to believe the doctors, but I was made to believe, because I'm severely asthmatic and I have very severe chronic allergies, if I didn't take it, that somehow I would die. Now, when I discovered all these things, I said, no more. And the strange part about it is that every time I took the vaccine, I was sick from October to April. Now, this supposedly vaccine was supposed to protect you, okay? And when I stopped taking the vaccines, and I put a lot of vitamins into my system. I mean, I dosed myself with tens of thousands of megadoses of vitamin C and all kinds of other vitamins.
Thanks. That's enough on this.
Okay, well,
Look, because
I
we
just
did-
wanted to-
Okay, but the truth is, we also did eradicate polio and we did eradicate smallpox, and it was vaccines, and they were crucial. I'm not doubting, because there's an intent to exterminate the human race right now, that people will poison people through this. But I also, we should stay on point here. We have a fascist coup which has just occurred. And if the United States does not get on track now and the population does not rally, we are under attack from the British Empire. I mean, the British Empire, the people who wanted to stop us from our inception, the people who supported the Confederacy during the Civil War, the people who assassinated the Kennedys and ran the cover-up, and the people who run Standard & Poor's, and the people who own President Obama. So it's a war, and our job here is to help our friends and neighbors, because people are delusional. It's a scary thing to recognize that the government, which is supposed to defend the general welfare, actually is intent on destroying the country. So that's why people insist on saying, well, the first bailout was necessary, right? Or the next bailout was necessary, or something. I'm sure they were really trying. I mean, didn't the market go up? And that's where each one of us has to become very sharp, because what we have to do in a loving way, because people underneath, I think part of the denial, everyone's heard the term hysterical denial. So you challenge what people believe and they go, ah! And they throw a crazy fit and they say that you're brainwashed and you're crazy and LaRouche and he's crazy. Yeah, because you're touching on something which they had a sneaking suspicion might be true, and they didn't want to face it. So the thing in this is we have to be very calm, very clear, like someone in a theater that's on fire saying, here's the way to the exit. And in our case, the way to the exit is Glass-Steagall immediately, no matter what. Congress should come back in an emergency session after this piece of crap that they just pulled, and the removal of Obama. And that absolutely has to be done. So what I would like to do, you would want to think about it,
Yeah, when I was in Washington,
oh yeah, good, you should tell me.
all right, I got hit with something and I didn't know how to answer it. And I think it would be really important for everybody here if you could explain it so that we would know how to respond to this. When I was telling them how we were going to get money back from the banks and stop the Wall Street payoffs. And what one of the aides of the congressman said to me was, well, the banks paid us back and we made a profit. And I was like, okay, I don't know how to get out of this. So because I'm not familiar enough with the banks paying back. Did they really pay it back? Is it in another fund somewhere?
Actually, a Bank of America and Citigroup are both about to go under. That's the truth of the matter. But what were you going to say?
Yeah, I just want to say, I was down in Washington too, and we spoke to Representative Crowley's legislative aide. And, you know, he listened and listened, and then he burst out saying, but now it's different. You know, Obama's different from Bush. Because look, they paid back the TARP money. GM paid back its loan completely. I mean, you know, this is different now. Don't you understand? You know, it's different. Obama's different. Well, the next day in the paper, it said, well, GM, the government is stuck outright with 1-point-something billion in the deal with Chrysler, where Fiat took over Chrysler. And also, as a matter of fact, they really didn't pay back the loan. They re-borrowed the money at a different interest rate, so they didn't really earn that much. And then we pointed out to him that Chrysler workers are making $14 an hour now instead of $28 an hour. And altogether, according to the New York Times, the very next day, out of the $80 billion that they loaned just the auto companies, they had to write off $14 billion, the government. So, I mean, they just had their facts wrong. They're, you know, and they're just repeating what they heard. What?
It's called lying.
Lying.
The bailouts are growing and growing. Remember now, the banking wants $1 trillion. Remember QE1 right after the November election was $600 billion. QE2 was $600 billion. Now they want $1 trillion. Because the way it works is that if I borrow from you $50, and then I borrow from you $300, then I pay you back. And General Motors did that, and they put out all these ads saying we've repaid our loans, and the Congress actually were the ones who had to make them take it off the air. Because it wasn't true, because they knew it wasn't true. They'd just gotten a larger loan to pay the first one off, and they were more in debt than before. And it is the case, apparently, the Bank of America and Citibank are absolutely in the tank, bankrupt, and this is why Bernanke, part of the $1 trillion QE3 that he wants is for those two banks.
And Fannie wants $500 billion.
Yeah, I believe it. Rick?
Yeah, why are the Europeans so happy about the United States providing a backstop to their banks if the United States is, according to S&P, is going to be able to pay its own debt?
Yeah, it's a good question, but are you?
Jeff. Just what Lynn was talking about in the interview early on today, about the insanity of people wanting to, you know, they're defending and they'll sell their country out for money that doesn't exist really. Right. I mean, it's just, but there's a madness, there's psychology there that I can't quite grasp, which may be a good thing. But how do you, in conversation, address? I've been afraid to bring it up.
Right.
So I don't feel like quick to really,
See, part of it is you have to tell the truth and know that they might not get it, but events will confirm what you say. Right. So they'll remember, God, that oddball Jeff told me this, you know, a month ago. Because one of the crazy things we ran into with the labor unions, at first the labor unions, some of the people we called would not support Glass-Steagall. I said, why wouldn't you support Glass-Steagall? Well, because our pension funds are invested in the stock market. And so we think if you're going to let the stock market crash, we'll lose something out of our pension fund. Which is a really stupid way to think, because you're losing civilization, and also you want to lose a little of your pension fund or lose the whole entire damn thing and have a blowout where you lose your house, your neighborhood, your police force.
It's like society responding almost as if it was programmed to respond that way.
Yeah.
Just a panic place.
Right. And so we just have to be very truthful, because some of them there may be nothing you can say that gets it through to them, but if you stick to your guns, things will happen which will vindicate what you said, and it will stick in their mind. The worst thing at a time like this is to try and soften the blow or, you know, skirt the issue, you know, say something that's not.
You're charming, you're polite.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it.
But,
I think it was 2 slides back from this one, when you was talking about NWAPA and how much it was gonna cost, what we needed, and so on and so forth. How can, this is optimistically, say it's approved by the Senate, 1489 goes, let's go to the future and it's passed, we kick their ass,
Right.
and we get it. How can the LaRouche people or the LaRouche TAC capitalize on that? You know, like how can we make some money out of this, or credit, or get credit to do these, or implement these projects?
well, see, here's the thing, because getting HR 1489 passed,
Right.
first of all, means that people know that we did it.
Right.
In other words, LaRouche is already becoming a folk hero. One of the arguments for why they didn't remove Obama a month ago was people in the Senate said, if we remove Obama, LaRouche will be a folk hero. Because everyone will know that that's, I mean, how long have we been out there with the mustache, right? So they said, well, we don't want LaRouche to be a folk hero, so let's do something else. So, but it's already implicit that HR 1489 is LaRouche. And if they get the guts to do it and pass it, then I can just about guarantee that Lyndon LaRouche is going to be running the program in a very hands-on way, because they know that no one else knows how to do this, and he does. And what he's saying is that under Glass-Steagall, because it becomes illegal to pay for speculative garbage, in effect, $17 trillion of this 26 trillion or whatever the heck it is that we've allocated immediately goes back into the U.S. Treasury, the Federal Reserve. In other words, this debt gets handed over to Wall Street. It's like a giant chargeback. Yeah. So then we have, it's not really money because we didn't have it in the first place. We made it up and gave it to them, but we're going to say, no, you take care of your own problems. We're taking this back, and that can be allocated in the form of credit for infrastructure.
Yeah.
Public credit. And that's how you do it. And frankly, what we've spent on the bailout so far probably would have built NWAPA about 5 or 6 times over, actually. But it is also a funny question, because when you think of this, you see the point that the money itself has no value. Money in and of itself is absolutely meaningless. It's worthless. It's the question of directionality. I've heard the figure that if you invest in so-called infrastructure, which I'm starting to hate the word because I do think what LaRouche says about platforms of levels of your whole economy is a much better way to think about it. But you get something like a 6-to-1 rate of return. And you can think it through, because if you're building something, what are you doing? Well, you're paying the people who build it. They're buying groceries, they're buying houses, they're putting the money in the savings bank. The bank is lending that money out. You need services for the people who are employed. You need material for the people employed building. So they need steel, they need copper, they need concrete. And all of a sudden, you've got this incredible multiplier, so that when you issue credit for building something in the real world, you're getting 6. In the space program, we got $10 back for every dollar we spent. Whereas if you issue the same amount of so-called money to buy paper back from some guy at Deutsche Bank who was gambling on 3,000 migrant workers in Bakersfield, California, who were lied to, who signed $300,000 to $500,000 mortgages, when you pay 100 cents on the dollar to buy those instruments back from that guy, what do you have? Right? Yeah, you can't eat it, you know, you have nothing. And this is, by the way, the other thing that everyone's going to have to really get under their friend's skin on is this, because people think money has an intrinsic value in and of itself. And it's really not. It's just, it's a credit that makes other things possible. I hope that helps.
Keep taking further.
We can take 2 more.
Okay.
speaking of fiat money, I've been trying to ask you folks for an explanation of how the National Bank is going to replace the Federal Reserve, because we don't understand how we can live without banks. We get rid of Citibank and Bank of America, etc. The money is in their computer, and what happens to that money? It goes back to the Federal Reserve's computer, which is full of private bankers anyway. Where is our national bank going to be? It can't be in the same building as the Federal Reserve. It can't be with the same idiots running it. I mean, there's Federal Reserve governors around the country saying that Bernanke is a nutcase,
Right.
but he's not getting covered. The news and newspapers are not covering it. People don't know what's going to happen if this TARP money, if the QE3 goes through, and the banks are still allowed to rip us off. Nobody knows what the alternative is, and we don't either, because no one's explained it to us, and you keep talking about it, but we need, real facts. Now it's too amorphous, it's too ambiguous. You gotta tell us something concrete. I mean, give us a real outline.
Okay. All right. Let's see what I can do. Look, I think a really good example is what FDR did when he came in and he shut down the banks for 4 days. And what he did was he sorted out the debt. In other words, you go through, and in this case, the Federal Reserve, the banks are all going to be broken up. There's no such thing as too big to fail. So the part that's playing the stock market, the part that sells insurance, they are going to be split off, and they're not allowed to have the same board members as the savings and loan section of the commercial bank. And people are going to have to go through on a bank by bank basis, what are the legitimate assets of the bank? People's mortgages, people's savings, various kinds of retirement accounts, things that the government does protect under a Glass-Steagall standard. So it's not the case that we're saying all the banks go under and everything disappears. There's actually a sorting out process where probably 95% or more of this stuff is going to be written off, and the things that actually are legitimate as they were, because the FDIC was created at the same time as Glass-Steagall. So the reason why you say we guarantee a certain amount of money is because you know that's legitimate money connected to something real. So you protect that. On this question of the federal, and one other thing, some debts may have to be restructured. LaRouche was describing something that I found fascinating, because he went into management consulting in the late 50s, and he had to look at the books of some of the banks, and he found that some of them were still paying debts from the 30s, which had been restructured under FDR. In other words, they found the bank couldn't honor that payment right then, but they had to keep credibility in the system for things that were legitimate. So they said, this will be paid off, but we're going to stretch out the amount of time to pay it. So in the 50s, he came in, and some of the debt that had been reorganized under FDR was still being paid, whereas a lot of it had been written off. But that's the sort of thing you have to go through, and you say the savings and loan banks are savings and loan, that's what they do, nothing else, and there's a firewall protecting that from everything else, which is also really urgent, because right now, since there's no firewall, well, what happens when the euro crashes? Well, they can just suck everything out of everything. You can just hear a great sucking sound. One of my friends used to say, you go to the ATM, stick your card in, and this little Pac-Man face will come on and stick its tongue out at you, and you won't get the card, and you won't get any money. It's so without Glass-Steagall, there's not any kind of protection of these legitimate functions. Now, on the national bank question, I forget who I was on with, but I was on one of the Saturday LaRouche shows, and there was someone from our national team, and one of the things they said I found very interesting. Because what they said is under Glass-Steagall, you could force the Federal Reserve to function more as a national bank, even though it wouldn't be in the sense of what it would pay for. That is, the Federal Reserve, instead of buying mortgage-backed securities and all this crap, could buy municipal bonds or state government bonds. In other words, the Federal Reserve could actually be investing in the municipalities and the states as a way that would get money flowing back into these municipalities so they would function. So it would begin to take on more of the action of what a national bank would be doing. But of course, that's why we're saying Bernanke and Geithner and these people have to go to jail. they're not gonna do it. But as you said, there are people, and Lynn said if we did get a national bank, there are people right now in some of these regional Federal Reserve offices who do understand economics. They've been fighting Bernanke like crazy. They're not idiots. So you would keep some of them who do understand something, and instead you'd run a national bank. And the credit, if you have a national bank, or if it's the Federal Reserve issuing, credit, the arteries of the credit are these private chartered banks, which are savings and loan banks, which are protected under Glass-Steagall.
What about commercial banks?
That's commercial, those are called commercial banks.
And but the ones who just do checking?
Correct. They do mortgages, they do small business loans, but they don't do stock market, they don't do money market, they don't sell you insurance. I love that.
The savings and loans did sell insurance at one time.
I know, but they wouldn't under Glass-Steagall.
Okay, so there won't be any more of those, there won't be Chase, Wells Fargo type banks anymore, just savings and loans?
Right, Chase might have a bank, but it's only a bank, and that's all it's allowed to do. And then they have Chase Investments and Chase, and they're all separate, and you're not allowed.
Investment bank will be separate from commercial banking?
Correct.
Okay, but they still do commercial banking?
Yeah, if they want to get their charter back. If there's anything real there, after everything they've been involved in, they could keep that part of it as a commercial bank.
Commercial banks should go too. I knew a banker, and during the S&L crisis, he told me, you have to be a damn idiot not to be able to make money in banking nowadays. So they knew what they were doing back during the S&L crisis.
Well,
They knew
of course,
that they
because
were
they took
rip
all
off the entire
Right.
country after the S&Ls went under to the commercial banks.
Well, remember, it was '99 when Glass-Steagall was repealed, and they were doing all kinds of screwy things leading into that. What in the Angelides report they call the shadow banking system, where you would start playing with things that don't really exist. Or the idea that most of us, I don't know how many people here are in banking, but most people would find it a little odd. I had a friend who was a farmer, and his farm went bankrupt, so he got a job working in a bank. And the bank got audited, and they said, well, you have to reduce your liabilities to assets ratio. So he said, I was really naive. I thought that meant we should recruit more people to have savings accounts at the bank, where you have actual money in the bank. He said, no, that wasn't it at all. They wanted us to issue a lot more money in loans and penalize people for saving, because nowadays they count the loan as an asset. Right? I mean, that's how crazy it is. But
Do you want to say something about the ordinance?
we can take questions for 10 more minutes. We
Okay,
can-
then you and,
Michael?
yeah.
Yes, states are also allowed to form banks, and North Dakota has done it. So if you Google and you look, you can see they've done it, and they're not suffering a recession in the state of North Dakota. The state bank has managed loans and has managed everything very well, and that all goes back to some Swedish farmers that started that at the turn of the century. And because the same thing had been done in Sweden back around then, before then as well, where they had formed community banks, and it was based on that model. So anyone that's giving anyone a loan knows that person. They know, it's a community thing. It's community based. And it's worked in North Dakota. Google it and read up on it. You'll see that it works.
Are they bankrupt too, like everybody else?
The state is actually not.
You want to say it's not
The
bankrupt?
state's not bankrupt. I don't think the people there are doing, I mean, you can't really be in the United States and be doing Social Security cuts and prices of commodities and things going up. But the state itself is not bankrupt.
Okay.
They didn't have a gigantic deficit like a lot of other states.
So, I heard it was 2 states. Indiana is one of them?
Was it, I don't think it's Indiana.
Okay, well, I heard there's 2 states
Yeah.
that aren't bankrupt, so North Dakota is one of those?
Yeah, I don't remember what the other one was. Yeah.
Small hamlets, small towns.
Yeah, I don't know. What, Rod?
Yeah.
One of the reasons that they changed the thing around with savings and loans, what their relationship is in terms of what's asset and liability, etc., was a change that took place when they deregulated under Reagan, which was a result of the whole accounting system got re-changed around. And part of the reason they were able to change it around is the people in the administration had changed the enforcement procedures on, and the National Association that they use for making accounting rules and regulations underwent a complete change.
Right.
Because when I was a young person, their system was completely different.
Right, now that's
Okay, and it was still, but when Nixon came in and supposedly got us off the gold standard and all that other stuff, that started the ball rolling to deregulation to the point where in '99 we got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act. And that's when investment banks and commercial banks were no longer separated. And you have this mess that you have today. That's the genesis of it. And that's why most people don't understand what's happening in terms of the value structures that we had years ago are completely demolished. There's been demolition derby of everything that was established under FDR, everything that was done to try and get us out of the Depression, to put us back in a position where we have now, where there's conspiracy from Britain and from the British banking system, and even with the cooperation and full cooperation in New York banking establishment.
Right. All right, so
It's all
I want
combined.
to stop with the questions. I want to get on to what we're going to do for the week. Do you want to say something? I'm going to go through that, but you should bear in mind the chart that I showed on population and energy consumption, because that's the axiom. That's where people get screwed up. As soon as you hear people talking about, it's the population curve, conservation, that the way we're going to get by is we're going to cut the budget. All right, well, is that what this is? They cut the budget and that's what happened? You're going to use less energy, right? Like that's what happened. No, the only pathway to survival is growth. Now, how many of you, what do you think your friends would say if you said, oh, no, I mean, we should cancel the bailout because they're spending money on the wrong thing, but actually the government should spend more money. How many people are going to say, why are you crazy? But the government should spend, but they should spend it on the WAPA. They should spend it on the things that generate growth. But everyone has been, and you find it in yourself, you accept these things. Oh, of course, we shouldn't. Well, yeah, so no one says you should be randomly wasteful, but it's actually, we should consume more. Our children should use more electricity than we do. They should have a higher standard of living. They should have more things that take care of physical, there's certain things I don't think we can get away from doing, like eating and whatever, and sleeping, and I don't know, we haven't figured that out yet, but certain, mechanical road things, why not? Why not let everyone have the chance to become a Beethoven or an Einstein? Spend more time on their mental life. And so these are the axioms that you really got to get at. And it's always useful to pinch yourself and say, okay, second law of thermodynamics, yeah, it's crap. And remind yourself in all these conversations, these silly arguments with the congressman or whoever starts talking about money, because it has nothing to do, we got it, I'm on this turn. It has nothing to do with money. It's not money. The question is, what's the human race going to look like a century from now? And will we have a human race on Mars by that time, which we ought to? And will we have much more nutritious forms of plant life and animal life? We'll have new species have developed because of NWAPA, because you bring water to the desert, and who knows what kind of fish is going to emerge once you bring water to the desert. I mean, why are we thinking like this? Okay, all right, very good. So we're officially disassembling. If you have questions, see me, Jerry, the back, whatever.
We'll go.